Welcome back to TPK 101, brought to you by Pear Studio. On this show, we talk about Savage Worlds encounters and how you can make better encounters for your games. It doesn't have to be Savage Worlds encounters. It could be D&D encounters. Take whatever advice we give you and apply it to whatever game you want, but we are going to be looking at Savage Worlds encounters and how we can make those better. I'm Goose, and I am joined by Peter Saloom of Pear Studio. Say hi, Pete.
How you doing today?
So today we are talking about ambushes.
Yeah. Surprise.
That's such a bad joke. Yeah, today we're going to go over ambush encounters and how we can make ambush encounters better. We're going to be looking at one of the most well-known ambush encounters in, granted, the other game in game of D&D, but we are going to be talking about it and how you could make that one better. We're going to assume some Savage Worlds rules. And so with rules, I guess we should dive in and talk about explaining the rules for Savage Worlds, yeah?
I think that makes sense.
So there's going to be three things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about stealth. We're going to talk about the drop, and we're going to talk about surprise. Those are the three things, three rules. So if you're looking in your Savage Worlds core rulebook, that's the things you're going to be looking at. Stealth is a skill. The drop is I think it's like end of the situational rules, and then surprise, I think, is as well. So first, we're going to talk about stealth and how stealth works. So the first thing is that when you are stealthing, and this works for player characters and for non-player characters, these are the rules for both of them, going both ways, but obviously we're talking about for non-player characters. Stealth says that you just have to roll stealth, whatever your modifiers are, get a 4, and you're not noticed. If you fail that, someone's going to notice you and they're alerted to your presence. Now, once someone is looking for you, if there's some people who are like actively searching for you, that they are on alert, that something's going on, at that point, you're going to be rolling opposed against their notice roll. So if you're running an NPC and you fail their initial stealth roll, and the PC is like, oh, what's that? And they start looking around. That stealth roll, you're going to roll stealth against their notice going forward. And so that's going to be important. Now, if you're ever doing some sort of sneak attack, that you're sneaking up behind someone, you're stabbing them, that's like a very different kind of ambush. I don't think that's quite what we're going for today. We can definitely talk about that in connection. If you're sneaking up to stab someone, you're going to be doing a sneak attack, and that is always going to be opposed by notice. So if you're like something up to someone to stab in the back, you're always going to be rolling against notice. You may have some bonuses or penalty stuff, but you're going to be rolling against notice. If you succeed against them when you're sneaking up on them, you make them vulnerable, so giving you a +2 to your attack roll. And if they're raised, you get the drop. Now, when you're doing stealth inside of combat, it's just a free action you have to do every time you move to make sure that you don't get noticed. But out of combat, it's really going to depend on your GM and how often you want them to be. And if you're the GM, obviously it's going to be very different how often you want to roll stealth against the players, how often you think they need to worry about that. But we're not too worried about that because it's usually we're talking about combat encounters and ambush encounters. So we are probably just worried about them noticing before that encounter starts.
Right.
Now, think about the drop is that if you have the drop on a character, you get +4 to your attack and damage rolls against that target for one action. So you don't get to do it multiple times. That'd be insane. But +4 is still pretty good. +4 means if you at least hit them with your normal roll, that's going to be a additional raise. Yeah, it's going to be a raise, which means you're going to get your extra D6 plus extra +4 damage. And then when you have the drop, there's something you have to look out for called the knockout blow, where if a character takes enough damage to be shaken or worse from the attacker who has the drop on them, they have to make a vigor roll, and it's a vigor roll at -2 if the attack was to the head, or be knocked unconscious. So there's a possibility that you just knock them out, and then they stay knocked out for, I think it's like half an hour, or until the GM decides it makes dramatic sense. That's that. And the last thing we worry about is surprise. And this is going to be like the most important rule that we need to explain for Savage Worlds, because this really affects how our encounters are going to go. If you have your NPCs, your monsters, your bad guys, and they are ambushing the characters, and the characters aren't really paying attention, they're not like looking out for anything, they're just kind of walking through, let's say down an alley, or what we're going to be looking at later is through the woods on a road, and they are being ambushed. The victims, so the player characters, are just going to roll a notice roll to see if they even can notice in time to participate in the combat for the first round. So basically,
to avoid the surprise.
Yeah, to avoid the surprise. So, and even then, there's still like an element which, in this situation, anyone who's ambushing just goes on hold. Like they get dealt in, but they just start on hold. If anyone's ambushing, they do get at least some advantage that they are going to be going at the top of the round, which in Savage Worlds can be extremely important considering how swingy damage can be, where you can just be taken out. So like before you get a turn, especially for extras. So it's a great advantage for them to ambush because they do get at least something, even if the player characters do succeed their notice roll to be dealt in that round.
Just to clarify, in this case, the goblins who are the ambushers are going to start this on hold, but they're also going to be dealt an action card. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. So they're starting on hold, but they're also dealt an action card, mostly just so that if they get a Joker.
Right.
Because if you don't want to miss out on Jokers, even as the GM, you don't want to miss out on Jokers.
Yeah, nobody wants to miss those.
So that's all the kind of rules that we're going to keep in mind as we kind of go through the encounter. Today, we're going to go over what I think, as someone who's played D&D since, before 2014, but I've been playing 5e since its initial release. We're doing almost the first encounter that was ever released, ever published for D&D 5e. And that is you're on the Tribor Trail, heading to the town of Fandalin for the Lost Mines of Fendelver adventure. So this was like the first adventure that was ever released. It was part of the starter set for D&D 5th edition back in 2014, and this was the first encounter that you happened upon, was this goblin ambush.
It seems to be designed as a very sort of tropey classic D&D adventure that like harkens back to older editions of the game, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that's what they were going for. Like there was definitely a sense in 5th edition, post 4th edition, that they're going for more of those old school D&D tropes. Kind of got missed out on a little bit in 4th edition. There's a different feel to 4th edition than there was previously. So they're trying to return to that, but also still keeping the game like a little bit simpler to get people into it. And obviously succeeded pretty well considering how popular D&D became.
Yeah, they did something right.
Kind of setting the scene, what's supposed to be happening here, kind of giving an idea of like what the characters are doing, is that they are taking goods from the town of Neverwinter to the small mining town of Fandalin. They have a cart with, I think, some ox, I think is what it is. You have like an ox cart with all these supplies that you're just trying to deliver. That's all it is. And you come upon some dead horses in the road that are full of arrows, and there's like some stuff around them. And at some point, the characters are to be ambushed by goblins that are in like the thickets on the side of the road, shooting arrows down at them so they can take all their stuff. I guess first we can talk about how the rules would affect this, like how you would do this rule wise. And then talk about how we can improve upon the basic summation of this to make this encounter better.
The first piece, when I read this adventure, that stuck out to me was the goblin ambushers either chose to or were not able to move these horses out of the road that, if I remember correctly, have like arrows sticking out of them and were clearly attacked. So there's a clue right away for the PCs as this encounter starts that something, out of the normal is going on, and it would be totally reasonable to suspect the PCs are now on some sort of heightened alert because you don't typically see, murdered horses in the middle of the road on your way down the road. That's not typical. And the arrows, instantly suggest that there was violence, right? It's curious from the perspective of the ambusher that would be left there because in theory it weakens their ambush, but that's what they've done, and they're goblins and they've got their motivations, whatever those are.
You might keep in mind it's like a very early adventure, so like level 1 character adventure, that it's possible. I mean, there's a couple of things happening here. There's also like some story clues that happen outside the game that are being put there, where there's like things on these horses that can tell you what happened. The horses, I believe, are easily identified as belonging to your employer in this case.
Yes. Yeah.
And so there's a lot of like clues that are happening here, and it does give the opportunity to kind of like for your characters to maybe like look for something. It clue them into a possibility of they were looking for something before they get that ambush in. Maybe you notice them before they get the ambush, and therefore you actually everyone gets dealt in normally because you draw swords because you notice that something's happening. So it gives I think the players an opportunity for a little bit of fairness. I
would imagine as an entry level adventure in the basic set, that's a design intention there.
Yeah, but I think that does kind of bring in, now that I think about it a little bit more, it does bring a question of one of the things that I thought about, and I didn't mention this earlier, is that Savage Worlds doesn't have a passive perception, right? You have to get a 4, and if you're not looking for something, there's no like, if you're not looking for something, you don't notice it. because you're not looking for it. Whereas in D&D, there's that passive perception idea where if someone rolls low enough, you may notice something even though you weren't necessarily looking for it, but you're like, oh, what was that? What was that? Huh? Whenever I first read the surprise rules for Savage Worlds, I always thought that they were like, oh, that's almost seemed a little bit unfair that the enemy, if you ambush someone, they get to go first without any, even if you get that notice roll. There's not like an opportunity for that. And so what I like about this, in the sense of like looking at Savage Worlds ideas, is that it gives the players an opportunity to at least give them a possibility of thinking, oh, I should look around for something, make sure. And then it's possible that they won't. They'll just be like, oh, gotta go move those horses, and then all right, cool, you get ambushed on. But at least there's kind of like a clue that they might need to do something else. At least we clued them in a little bit, right?
Yeah, I think that comes down to how the game master runs the game. I understand, we covered rules as written there, but I think the vast majority of the Savage Worlds GMs, if they had their party walking into a planned ambush, would probably, correct me if I'm wrong, I think they would lean towards saying the ambushers are going to need to exceed the notice. It's going to be an opposed roll versus the standard surprise roll there. The reason for that is it gives your players a chance to spot the ambush before it happens, which they have no chance of doing, the way that you just outlined, because of that lack of just sort of underlying alertness, I guess. That wasn't going on. So I think I would probably fudge it that way and say, okay, you're walking down the road on a mission and there's some dead horses. You are on alert. You don't know what you're looking for, but you're looking for something. And these goblins are going to roll versus your notice, rather than you guys just succeeding to get into the first round there. Still, a lot of crazy stuff can happen stemming from that. So I don't think it's eliminating the element of surprise.
It sounds like that the rules you just described actually makes it more difficult to get into the first round combat then. Am I wrong?
Let me think about it. So I've got my players walking up the road. They see some horses laying in the distance here as they approach. Everybody, please make a notice roll. Okay, here come the rolls. Everybody who succeeds, I'm not going to, if they spring their trap, they're going to be dealt in. But I would also have a point here where somebody would roll like 2 raises. And I guess I would have to get creative with that particular roll and say something like, you detect the glint of light off of what appears to be metal, or you see some goblin flesh hidden in the leaves on the steep embankment beside the road or something. And it may give them some advantage where, I don't know, maybe they can start on hold as well. I don't want to rewrite the rules to the whole game here, but the intention is that the rules are there for you to use as you see fit for the scenario. But maybe we're getting off track, because
I think it's important for us to understand how GMs run these rules, because you say every GM kind of runs it a little differently. You say that you would run it a little differently than maybe the way it works. And I think that's completely valid. Regardless of what the rules are officially, it's our game as GMs and players that we can make it whatever we want. And I do understand why the surprise rules are like this, because I know a lot of people get a little bit frustrated when they, all right, well, out of nowhere, I'm going to punch him in the face. And it's like, okay, cool. Let's see if they get dealt in to respond this round. You still get to go on hold because you're the one that initiated this combat. You should get that first hit in, and then everyone else can respond. Like, you can just roll a notice roll to see if anyone can key in that you're going to punch that person in the face and respond this round. They're not going to be able to stop you because you're going to punch in the face, but maybe they can at least get in this round to respond. And same with this, I think same kind of thing with surprise. The thing about the stealth rules is that I think that I would personally have the goblins roll some sort of stealth to make sure that they succeed in stealthing at all, because basically if they fail their stealth roll, they don't get surprise. It's just cool. The goblins fail their stealth roll, so you go, hey, as you are walking, you're going down this trail, you hear the snapping of twigs over in the sides, then you do that second stealth roll and the notice roll, and I would say, like, at that point, if they fail that, like if the goblins fail it, I would probably just take the best of the player rolls, probably, or something like that. And I would also do a group roll for the goblin. So it wouldn't be like individual stealth rolls; it would be a group
Right.
roll for that. Group rolls is where if you have like a bunch of characters and you want them to like roll like as a group, you just if it's a bunch of extras, just roll their stealth die plus a wild die, and that's what their result is as a group. So it makes things a lot easier. So I'd roll it as a group roll, and then if they fail it, they wouldn't get surprise or something like that.
I do really like the idea from a narrative point of view that if they really botched the stealth roll to spring the ambush, that they would not be aware, that the players would be able to, you would be able to tell the players you detect that they are springing an ambush as you approach. What do you do? But that the goblins, based on the players' actions, if the players point and yell, "Hey, there they are," well, then they'll know. But there may be reasons for the players to kind of counter the ambush a little bit by
right,
playing stupid for a few more moments and getting into position.
which basically lets them kind of start on hold too. Like it kind of basically actually going back to what you were
It
saying
basically
originally.
it kind of switches the ambush.
Yeah, it basically
At that
goes like
point.
now a reverse ambush. So they
Mhm.
basically have to start in hold, and the monsters then they start their attack. Their card is dealt. Everyone kind of starts on hold, but the goblins are activating, which does mean then that this is one of my favorite things about Savage Worlds. I love interrupting actions. I love the fact
What's
that we
that?
can interrupt turns. I love the fact that
I
players
know
just go.
players love it. They feel like they're breaking the rules.
My players never do it.
And and when they get to do it, or when they figure out they can do it, especially with like a Joker, they always have this grin on their face, like a child that is getting away with something that they shouldn't be.
Right.
So it's important to let your players know about this, because any newer players, and again, this is sort of an early stages adventure. It's possible that the players are experienced, but they could be new as well. You want to try to make them aware of as much of this stuff as you can, because those little things are what make Savage Worlds tick, and really, in my opinion, are like keys to the enjoyment of the game.
And my players do it sometimes. I shouldn't say they never do it. They'll just go on hold, and they will only occasionally will they interrupt other actions. But I do love that you can do that. I actually find that people are more willing to do that in modern and futuristic games where firearms are more involved, because they want to take cover, and then they want to go on hold when they're uncovered, so that once someone steps out of cover, they'll try to interrupt their action, pop out of cover, shoot them, get back down under cover. Whereas in a fancy setting where you're doing a lot more melee combat,
Okay.
you're not necessarily like trying to hide under cover, wait for someone to do the wrong thing and then do it. You can do that, but usually I find that usually people who are in melee, they just want to do it. They don't want to wait. They just want to attack right now.
Yeah, until they
rangers.
learn how precious their healer is, and that they need to be able to interrupt and stop that attack on the healer that they didn't know was coming. That stuff becomes, after you lose a party member or two, that stuff becomes a painful way to learn the lesson.
But back to that main point is that you could definitely just make it so that they go on hold as well,
Right.
assuming a failed stealth roll or something like that. I do think that rules as written, they succeed their stealth roll, and the players don't ever look out for them. They don't ever try to notice if there's a combat about to happen. All the players do their notice roll to see if they get dealt in at all, and the goblins start on hold, right? But I do think if they see that horse, if we're assuming the horse is still there at the end of this trail, and they see it and they want to look around to see if there's anything, that if they succeed, if anyone really succeeds, I think the goblins should not be able to get their surprise, essentially, and it just becomes a normal initiative combat. Or if they want to, if the players want to play it coy, they can just go and hold. Like, okay, we're going to go into a combat. Sort of, like, we're going to start on hold. Goblins will do their thing. They'll get their card. They'll be on, all that kind of stuff. So I think that's a easy way to do it, and that allows the players to actually like have an opportunity to respond to the ambush they notice.
Yeah, there's a couple different outcomes here. I think they're all valid. Feel out what it is that works at your table. Whatever's in your comfort zone, I would just kind of go with that.
As far as we're concerned, that's the rules of the game, and you kind of like, how you can like tweak them a little bit if you want to. But like, how do we make this encounter more interesting for players other than just a generic, okay, you're ambushed, goblins, cool, now you just have a fight?
Yeah, well, it should be easy, because from what I read of the original, copy, aside from the fact that it is an ambush, it's basically just some goblins come down and start whacking you with sticks and stuff, and after you kill some of them, they start running away.
Right.
It's about as standard stock as it could be.
Yeah.
So
I think I always plays it with them having bows as well. So it's like just a rain of arrows first, keeping their distance.
even more lackluster in my opinion.
Okay. I think it makes
Because
more sense.
now they're not even down there doing anything. But so I would rate, the encounter as it stands, before we work our magic, like a D, I guess. It's just like it is what it is, and it's nothing special. I don't think it was designed to be anything special, so it's not a shot at whoever wrote that up.
Chris Perkins is so upset, I don't know
Yeah,
if it's Chris, it might not have been Chris
yeah.
Perkins.
How will he ever find work after I've said this about him? Huh? The first thing I think of, and I sound like a broken record because I come on here every time now, is what are the victory conditions? What are the defeat conditions of the encounter? And the victory condition in this case is either just defeating them outright in combat, just killing the opposition, or it might be there's potential here where you can follow or track these goblins and you gain other crucial insight into the adventure. So I would consider that a potential victory condition too, because it advances the player's understanding and their progress on their quest. There's kind of two there. And obviously the losing condition in this one is dying. That's always the losing condition, but I don't really see how, if they lose this encounter, I'm not quite sure how there would be other ramifications on the world around them. I guess the goblins are free to rob the next people that come down the trail too, but that doesn't seem so really consequential, or doesn't really have a lot of narrative weight to me.
In that vein, though, of the goblins being able to kill other people or rob other people on the way, I think we have to keep in mind again, like this is like a level. For D&D, this is a level 1 adventure. We can imagine this is like a first novice adventure, and the world when you're starting out, I think that when you have like entry level characters, the world should not be that big. Like maybe it should be more consequential that these goblins take out someone, because they're going to this town Fandalin, and that's going to be for this adventure. That's their hub, right? That's where the whole adventure is taking place, is in this town of Fandalin until the end. And this is like one of the big trails that's on the way to this town. And so I think there could be consequences like that. I think it's a really good idea for a consequence. There being the people along the way that get robbed. That might be normal. You could say it's normal, but maybe it's someone that's like the daughter of the tavern keeper whose tavern you stay at, or something like that. Because there's a lot of there's only so many people or big important NPCs in this town that you can easily connect the next person that gets robbed to.
So the GM has to connect that implication to the world that the PCs are existing in, and that's what you're saying. And that makes it much more satisfying. Even if they lose, it makes it more satisfying just in a story sense for them. Oh, we have to deal with this penalty now because we ran from the goblins on the road instead of taking care of business there, and instead we ran away, and we lived, but now
someone else got hurt.
Yeah. Now we've got to deal with another problem. That's just so much more interesting long-term gameplay to have those types of consequences. So when you're designing, any encounter, think about what are the losing conditions beyond just you died. And in this case, it would be, well, you retreated to stay alive, but the next person coming down the road was an important connection to an NPC in the next town, and now you've got this other arc and this other complication to deal with. Or you might have to explain, like, oh, we're the guys who didn't take care of that out there.
I was thinking about some other possible losing conditions, right? And keeping in mind, the players are supposed to be transporting goods on the back of an ox or an ox cart, right?
Okay. So there is a payload that needs to be protected here. So
exactly.
That's a whole new winning and losing condition. There is, you guys are charged with protecting a payload, and a losing condition is maybe you do defeat the goblins, but somehow in the ruckus, either the payload is destroyed, the oxen is killed, and you're not able to move it, the oxen bolts or something. And now you've got a problem going to figure out where it went off to. A lot of different complications that come from that. So that really makes it more interesting. You've got something to protect. So yeah, you've got a major thing you're hauling. So it makes you a big target because you must have something good on there if you need 2 oxes to carry it down the road. Yeah, and now you've got consequences. So already, just with that, the encounter becomes richer, in my opinion.
I've run this adventure like 3 times for players. I have seen it ran for some players a few times. I've seen people actual play podcasts run this adventure several times. And one of the things that I find that most of the times that either I or other people miss out on is that consequence of the goods and the oxen, right? And like the possibility that these oxen could get hit by get killed by an arrow.
Gray arrow.
And they really don't put that kind of like flavor into the world of like, okay, we have to remember this whole situation here and like these extra environmental possibilities. I say environmental, it's not like it's a part of the environment, but it's a part of the obstacles around
that counts. That counts as environmental for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. What happens when 2 700-pound ox get spooked by a noise in the middle of a combat and decide to run straight down the road? You've got an environmental hazard here.
When the wizard starts casting fire bolts over and over again into the woods.
Yep, I would be definitely considering having people making athletics rolls to get out of the way as their, wagon load of stuff is charging straight ahead,
Yeah, or maybe some sort of like persuasion roll to help out the animals, kind of keep them calm, something to make sure that nothing goes wrong. Yeah.
And you've probably got a heads up player that says, I'm going to be tending to these oxen because this is about to get crazy, and in those cases, reward them for successes and raises and being able to keep that stuff from happening and tell them like, well, you got a raise on this. And that's the reason they're not stampeding the rest of your adventuring mates right now. Things like that. Make it worthwhile. We kind of segued from losing condition there when we were talking about the payload there. Another thing I would say is, are there duration limits on this encounter? The ones I would think of are, do the goblins have in mind how long they want to fight for? Goblins are, as I understand, opportunistic sort of bandits. They're not there because they just have bloodlust and the love for battle. They're there because they think they can take your stuff back to their tribe, community, whatever it's called, and enrich themselves and eat and things like that. So there's a point where they want to quit. Is there a time frame on this encounter? As written, I believe it's sort of just open-ended, but you could consider something like, well, if the players don't take care of business in 4 rounds, then the goblins calculated is not worth their effort and they run back home, or something like that, kind of regardless of losses. This could segue into something else. They could be pursued. The party could say, oh, good, they ran away, we're good. And that could be the end of it. There may want to be some durations there.
And we were talking about the oxen. We can even use the oxen as a duration limit too, to say like after so many rounds, these oxen are going to get upset and are going to start running as well.
I love that. They've got the patience for 3 rounds and then they're just putting their heads down and running path of least resistance, wherever that may be. Probably in the direction they were heading. They're not going to turn around their big wagon.
Yeah, but maybe
it's going to be without them.
Yeah, and it might result in like the cart turning over and spilling all the goods everywhere.
Yeah, they're going to crash into that pile of horses. It's going to be a whole mess. Yeah. So I love that. I think that's another great way to do that. I'm sure that folks listening have other ideas about ways you could structure events into the duration of this that would kind of be keyed in on certain rounds or when certain things happen. I love that in encounters when I'm playing. I love when the GM says like, oh, okay, now this round, we're going to have to top of the round. Everyone's making an athletics check because the whole ship just listed over to the port side extreme. And we got to make sure nobody falls off the rails and into the water. Things like that to me are like, they're realistic. They're cool. I wasn't planning for it to happen. It was sprung on me and I like it. So,
okay. So we've talked about kind of like how we could do that kind of like combat after the encounter, but it's going back to the actual ambush a little bit and kind of things that we need to look at to set up for what kind of, and kind of looking at other environmental things that could actually affect the ambush itself. I don't know if this is written into the adventure. I don't remember it being written into the adventure, but the way that a lot of the people who run this adventure do it, and maybe it's because of the map that tends to go with this particular adventure and this portion of the adventure, is that there is these like steep embankments on either side of the road.
Mhm.
And then at the top of the embankments is like some sort of foliage that is obscuring these goblins from being seen. So we have a couple other things kind of going on there. One, we have got this like, okay, now we've got protection for these goblins because a steep embankment is going to make it hard for the players to get to them to attack them. But we also have the foliage itself that's around them that's going to be able to give a cover bonus, right? So we have that's one of the things that we didn't really talk about when it comes to stealth is the bonuses and the penalties, or both, that can happen with stealth, and like what kind of things you can reasonably give your monsters. You don't want to go too far, because I feel like if you give your NPCs like ridiculous stealth bonuses, your players are going to call you, a cheater or something. I don't know. Having like this brush and bushes and stuff to hide behind, legitimate cover bonus to your stealth. I think the idea that usually people usually do this is like it's like midday when they do it, so there's not really much cover for darkness, but there could be. You could say, oh, this is early morning and there's a fog rolling in through this valley, and that valley is going to give some additional, maybe it's like that fog makes it dim light, and so there's an additional, maybe not a bonus to the stealth roll, but maybe a penalty to the stealth to the notice roll, to either see them in the first place, to be in the combat at all if the surprise does happen. So I think there's definitely some other things we could do environmentally here. What are some other ideas that you have?
I think environmental and timing things could make this more interesting and potentially a lot more dangerous. One thing the GM might not be totally in control of is when the PCs actually decide to do this. They may decide, oh, we would rather move this precious cargo under the cover of night because there'll be less people on the trail or something. And so then the GM should just be ready. Okay, I've got this encounter planned. Now it's going to be nighttime. How does that change things? It certainly is going to make an ambush harder to spot. It's also going to make some horses laying in the road ahead of you harder to spot until you're much closer. In terms of cover for little goblins hiding way up a steep embankment, maybe refusing to come down and enter into melee with larger man-size opponents and just slinging rocks and arrows, they're going to have a major advantage versus broad daylight, where at least the melee folks in the party are probably going to be willing to charge up that hill and try to close the gap between them and the enemies. Lighting is a big environmental factor here. If you lose those oxen in that cart in the middle of the night, the chances of you finding it before morning are probably much lower as well, just because, again, now you're wandering around in the dark, maybe with some torchlight or lantern light, trying to find your payload. So that's a big deal. And then, I don't know if it suggests or requires a specific time of year or weather condition. It could be anything.
Well, they are coming from the town of Neverwinter, so
Okay.
so not winter. No.
So not very wintry. So maybe it's not wintry, but maybe it's extremely rainy and muddy, and the road is rutted out, muddy cart ruts, and it's a whole slippery mess. And running up that hill is way harder than it should be.
Maybe right up the hill, it's like a -2 athletics roll or something.
Yeah, you're really gonna have to struggle to get up there without sliding back down.
Yeah.
And so now that's a whole issue. So all that stuff just enriches the problems of the encounter. It makes the tension go way up at the table. Hey, I'm charging up the hill. Okay, the mud and the rain is just running down the hill. You've got your heavy armor on. You're carrying your warhammer. Here you go. It's going to be really hard. Athletics -2. Okay, I'm going to try to get up there. And you fail, and now you're laying down in a puddle back in the road, and the arrows are still coming down. It really ratchets up the tension. People, start to get worried, and the bennies start flowing.
So one of the things I was thinking about, we've really kind of focused a little bit on the ensuing combat after the ambush. We've talked about the ambush itself, but one of the things I realized we didn't talk about, and we mentioned the rule for this, but we didn't really talk about doing this inside combat, and that is goblins maintaining their stealthy status during the combat. Yes, they're going to have to roll a stealth roll if they do this, but theoretically they could shoot an arrow, duck it back into the bushes, and then stay hidden. What are your thoughts on that?
In those cases, I believe the unseen goblins would be trying to get what's called the drop on an opponent in combat. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. I think they just don't want to be seen so they don't get attacked. I think that's more of my mind at least is. That's where I'm going with it. Because the only way to guarantee the drop would be to sneak up on them and stab them. I guess if the adventurers like run up to the top and get into the bushes, and then the goblins are there, they could switch to their daggers and try to do that.
Yeah, I was actually thinking the opposite. I was thinking if this were a night encounter, that some of the goblins might descend the hill, either from the other side of the road or try to get behind. And then those are the ones that, with the party members distracted by the rocks and arrows coming down the hill, these other, sneakier goblins are coming up behind him with the daggers. That seems like a very goblin thing that would happen. Something like that where it's sneaky and they think they can get away with it easy. The other tactic with them would just be like sort of giant swarm of overwhelming numbers, sort of safety in numbers type of strategy, which is not so stealthy.
Yeah, and I don't think it seems to be like what this encounter is kind of going for is like this like big numbers thing. But
No.
I'm definitely thinking more of like the lines of like, shoot, move to a new location, shoot, move to a new location. And as far as it comes to being stealthy inside combat, it just says that the rules just say the characters roll stealth each turn for a free action when they move or when they do an action that the GM thinks might draw attention. Shooting an arrow is going to draw attention to you. And like some other like I think in D&D, like when you do an action like that, you're out of your scene. And to get back into a hidden state is rather difficult. I feel like the rules allow for this idea of like quick attacks that could just expose you, but if you're stealthy enough, you may be able to avoid detection continuously. It doesn't mean that the players on their turns can't spend an action trying to notice that goblin and therefore exposing the goblin until for indefinitely at this point. Until they get like
right,
complete
because
cover.
although the goblin is going to remain stealthy, the arrows aren't going to stop. So the
Right.
PCs, although they may not know where this goblin is, they know
There
a
is
goblin is up there shooting arrows at them, right?
Right.
So it wouldn't take much for any of them to say, well, I'm just trying to pinpoint his location. From my perspective, I would say, yeah, just give me a notice. You see where that last arrow came from and you're kind of tracking the movement to the left over here. And yeah, you see he's crawling through the bushes trying to line up his next shot. That's exactly how I would resolve that. And at that point, I wouldn't really let that goblin probably go back to stealth for that encounter because they've got his number now and they're keeping an eye on him.
Yeah, I would agree with that entirely. This session is about ambushes, and obviously once the ambush starts, it goes into a normal combat afterwards, but there is definitely a sense in which we can still keep the ambush happening during the combat by maintaining the stealth status of the these goblins in the first place or any of the monsters that you're doing in your encounters. So it's kind of something like we want to keep in like, okay, you can still do this. I would probably say though that so if the goblin shoots an arrow, they're on alert. Like, okay, that stealth roll should probably be opposed. Actually, I may not even require the players to waste their notice roll on their turn to do it. I might just say this is going to be an opposed roll.
That actually is probably more equitable to the PCs because then they don't have to do like maybe multi-action on their turn and hit an extra penalty when they've probably already got some penalties going on from darkness or whatever.
Depending on how you read the rules, I think that might be the intention is that like, so basically I feel like anytime the stealth roll is rolled, like just period, whether it be in combat or out of combat, the question is the target number a 4 or is it opposed by the notice? And the opposed by notice is always going to be, is the character that is rolling the notice aware that
something's going on?
Something's going on. And
they don't have to be aware of you because that's what the whole stealth thing is. Are they just aware like, I need to be alert in this moment? I don't know what's going on. I heard sticks cracking in the forest. I don't know anything about goblins or anything like that, but I'm just like, okay, I'm paying attention.
Yeah. And if an arrow comes out of nowhere, you're gonna be on alert. You're gonna pay attention. You could say that in the middle of combat, if you are trying to keep the stealth state of a goblin, you probably should make that an opposed roll against the notice of. Probably, I would say that maybe just the character who just got shot at, whoever just got shot at, they get to make it's opposed against their notice to see if they recognize where just happened. Because if you're not being shot at, there's possible you may not notice as much. So if you just want to decide like one player that you're going to roll that stealth roll against, make it that person, and it makes them kind of get a little bit of a bonus to get to do something. Like, oh, I just got attacked. Now I get to do something. So it kind of like gets that player who just got attacked involved in the combat a little bit more, even if they just took a wound or got shaken or something. It's like, okay, cool. At least I'm going to get something out of this.
I think that all makes the gameplay better.
It doesn't feel as cheap to the players as well.
One thing about the players' the player feelings about ambush is I don't think there's going to be, so this all depends on your group and
Right.
the personalities you play with. But if you're going to institute an ambush in your game, ambushes make people feel ripped off. That's what they are. It's, I have a sneaky, unsuspected, huge advantage on you that I'm going to use to kill you. So victims of ambushes feel bad. They do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now I'm saying the victims of the ambush, which are the characters, that doesn't need to bleed over to your players necessarily. I know that's easier for some people than others, okay? But it doesn't need to bleed over to your players where they go, well, I think Goose is just trying to make it hard for us. He's sick of running this and he's trying to kill us off or something like that. That doesn't need to be the perception. It's an ambush. It's a real tactical thing. It happens all the time in military type situations or, dangerous situations. It's the best way to attack an enemy is when they are not expecting it.
Guerrilla warfare is quite effective.
Yeah. Goblins would not exist as goblins if they had to charge across a field at their enemies every time.
One of the things you just said, though, is important, is that in keeping in mind, and I think anytime I talk about increasing challenge for players as a game master, a lot of people think I'm trying to encourage some sort of game master versus player mentality, and I'm not. There's a couple rules that I think I'm trying to kind of abide in. One, that I believe heavily that players have fun when there is a challenge. I had a combat recently that I wish I would have just done as a quick encounter because it was extremely boring. It was so boring. It was 4 ghouls in a cave that were not expecting the player characters to come up on them. They're like, oh no, kind of go feral a little bit, but the players just killed them. And I wish I hadn't wasted time.
Yeah,
it wasn't fun for the players. It wasn't fun for me.
Yeah, it just falls flat.
Yeah, it felt completely flat. I wish I would have just done a quick encounter in my prep, right? If I would have realized, okay, this is going to be boring if we just do this early this way, either skip it, quick encounter, or I need to make this more interesting and more challenging. And that was part of the problem for the players. So like, it was just boring. They didn't get to, they attacked their things and that was it. And they went on. Now I didn't have fun, which game masters should have fun, and the players didn't have fun. So when we talk about like doing things like ambushes, which in a sense don't seem fun because they seem hard and it's difficult, I think it can introduce a level of challenge that is going to be fun for your players, because now especially if they can get themselves into some sort of more cinematic mood about it. Like, oh no, okay, cool. I'm going to dive under the cart and take some cover under the cart, which I'll say, like, a lot of times when I ran this game, that was the thing that people would do, is that they would jump into the cart and hide behind the cover, and then they get their bows out and then they would pop out and shoot. That's something people did do often, and that's awesome. So if players are doing that, that's great. So
that's great, because that's engagement. They're thinking about the stuff around them. They're not just looking at the character sheet and saying, I don't know, what does the most damage, that, they're embracing, the scenario and their character and what their character would do. There's not a whole lot of characters, no matter how brave or stupid they are, that would just stand in the middle of the road while arrows were raining down on them from both sides.
So all that being said, is that don't take this in the direction of, I'm going to crush my players with ambushes. Nope. That's not the intention. That's not what we want. We want we kind of want your players, we want your players to live, your characters to live, or at least some of them to live, or ideally all of them. This is called TPK 101, but we do not advocate for TPKs. Unless their players are being really dumb, in which case that's their own fault.
I mean, some of it is out of your control.
Right. And sometimes the dice are just going to not be in, especially in Savage Worlds, sometimes the dice are just not going to be in your player character's favor, which is why I personally roll out in the open, so that I put, when I ace on dice, they go, I'm like, you saw it. I didn't do anything. So that's, I like, and I find that my players get a lot more tension now that they get that a little more excitement to see my dice being rolled, especially when I ace. They're like, oh no, he aced. What are we going to do? personally, I think it's a lot more fun to roll on the open. And it's really crazy when I roll critical failure, double snake eyes, and they go, ah.
Yeah, right, exactly. It goes both ways.
Right. So
And yeah, it's not, you don't want your players to think the GM has it in for you, but if they do think that, you've probably got bigger problems in your gaming group. But you do want the characters to learn to really, really dislike being ambushed.
all right. So with that, kind of going over everything again, ambushes can be a great way to kind of increase your tension in the game and increase some challenge for your players. But we want to make sure that you're writing them in a way that seems fun and engaging. So keep all that in mind. And I hope you enjoyed this week's episode or this month's episode. I don't know what the cadences for these are going to be. This episode of TPK 101. If you have encounters you want us to look over and give you some feedback on, leave a comment down below. We'd be happy to hear about them and look at them and maybe discuss them on a future episode. So yeah, leave those down below. We'd love to hear from you.
If you've sprung some fantastic ambushes on your gaming table, let us know what those were like too. I'd love to hear them.
All right, with that, have a great day. Keep gaming, stay savage, and may you be the wild card in your own life.